What's up, people? How are we doing tonight? Welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you've all been just watching Wheeler Dealers. Just gone out on Discovery Channel. If you have, I hope you enjoyed that episode. It was the Mitsubishi Evo 7 tonight. And I know we're here to talk about F1, and I absolutely will do, but that was one of my favourite episodes. And I'll tell you that little opening scene, if you did watch it, of me at the rallying school, one of the best days at work I've ever had. You could barely drag me out of that car. I was enjoying myself so much. Mike, by the way, hated every second of it because he was sat in the passenger seat. But there we go. We'll talk about Formula One. Hello to you all from wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining. I've been already answering some questions in the chat, so thanks to all of those of you who joined earlier. I need to quickly address this one from Jonathan Moore, who says 2-1 odds that Marc's already drinking a beer or whiskey and eating Halloween candy. I'll take that from you, Jonathan. I'm not. I'm drinking wine tonight. I know, you're probably thinking, yeah, he's going to be already whining on for the next hour anyway, so wine's the perfect drink. Well, there you go. Hello to you all. We're going to talk everything Formula One tonight. If you want to talk Wheeler Dealers, fire in some questions. We'll cover any of that too. Whatever you want to cover tonight. I've been flicking through the SeedStream app just before I came on tonight, just checking some of the big stories. There's a number of big topics that have crept up, as they often do in a non-Formula One race week. So we'll get into some of those. If we get stuck for questions, I'll drop in a couple of my own or a couple of topics that I think we should cover. One thing I do want to get your opinion on is the idea of next year potentially going down to a 3-day weekend, which is something that we think is almost certainly going to happen. And instead of having the media day that currently happens on a Thursday, they're going to invite the teams to give their own descriptions of their upgrades for that weekend. I can't wait to hear some very selective descriptions of a team's own upgrades to the media. But I want to know what you think of that. I mean, do you take any value at all from a Thursday media day, if you like, on a Grand Prix weekend? Do you watch it? Do you watch the press conferences and that kind of thing? Would you miss it if it was gone, or do you not really care? Let me know what you think on all of that, and we'll cover anything else you want to talk about. Yes, hello to you all. Thank you. I won't go through everybody, but I really genuinely appreciate wherever you are in the world dropping in on this evening session. I really enjoy it. I hope you do too. So, where shall we start? Let's start with the idea. Well, let's start with Mexico. Why don't we start there? The Mexican Grand Prix coming up. We might as well cover that off before we get into some of the wider topics. Mexican Grand Prix, one that I normally enjoy. I normally enjoy watching. Definitely used to enjoy going to. It's an amazing city, incredible place to visit. If you've ever been to Mexico City, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's an amazing place. They've also created a racetrack there, which, with that new section around the old baseball stadium, is a fantastic place to watch Formula One. One of the best places. It's not the most spectacular sequence of corners, relatively slow speed, but the atmosphere in that little amphitheatre type section is just brilliant. And of course, with Checo this year, well, let's say in a faster car than he's typically been there before, I can only imagine the crowd are going to be absolutely fantastic. But the big question that lots of people have been asking, and is probably the big talking point, is who's the circuit going to favour? We touched on this last week. Typically, it hasn't favoured Mercedes particularly strongly over the years, has it? They've had issues with the altitude. It's a very, very high location. I mean, it's over 1 kilometre higher than the next highest racetrack on the circuit. I mean, that's a lot. It's well over 2 kilometres above sea level, and you notice it. So even just walking around, climbing up a set of steps, you really feel it. And I'm relatively fit. These guys are pounding round lap after lap in a car, and that is a physical exertion anyway, and it really does take its toll on the drivers as well as the teams over the course of this weekend. But it also takes its toll on the engines. And of course, when we had normally aspirated engines, they were literally just down on power because they just didn't have as much air or as much oxygen to compress and feed into the engine. Nowadays, of course, we're running turbos, but it does mean that the turbos, although they can compensate for that thinner air, they have to work a lot harder to do so. So to cram in as much charge air as they want to in the engine with the thinner air that's available, they have to work harder to do so, and that puts those components under greater strain. Now, we know that the Mercedes power unit has had some reliability issues. They have changed turbos as part of this streaming through different components of the power unit that they've had over the course of this year. But I don't think, from what I can gather, the turbo is one of their major weak spots. Don't know for sure. I'm only reading between the lines on what I've seen in interviews and what people have said to me. I'm not sure they're necessarily expecting any major issues with the engine just because it's Mexico. Having said that, the circuit, as I said before, doesn't typically suit them. Whereas for Max Verstappen and Red Bull, it kind of looks like it may well suit them. So we don't know what weather's doing. That's another massive variable. This is a changeable time of year for the weather. The long range forecast looks like there could well be rain interfering with the weekend. So it's a bit of a lottery in that regard. But in terms of a face-to-face level conditions with the two cars, you might say it could, on paper at least, start to favour Red Bull over Mercedes. Maybe not by very much, but sometimes it's only that much that matters. So look, that's how it looks on paper. But that's not how we race. Anything could happen, as I say. Lots of stuff, lots of variables in the mix. Let's see. It favours Marc if they had a different engine. Well, we'll see. One thing that this system that Mercedes have introduced in the latter part of the year, or certainly a system they've enhanced. I don't think actually it's something they've just introduced, but I think they've upgraded this collapsible rear suspension or made a much more efficient version of it in the latter half of the season. Of course, there's a very, very long straight at Mexico City. The first sector is very, very straight, long, high-speed straight sections. So that is where that system will effectively come into play and give them a top speed advantage along that very long straight. And because it's such a significant straight, particularly in race scenario, that's where you're going to start making up positions. So that could play into their favour. We'll have to wait and see. Why is it that Marc struggled Mexico compared to other power unit suppliers? Well, I think in recent times it has been typically around the turbo, and it's obviously around the induction, isn't it? Because that's the bit that's affected mostly by the thinner air. And so either the turbo is weaker, the MGU-H is not as effective, and in the old days, pre-turbo, it may just have been because they couldn't maximise, they weren't as efficient in terms of getting the airflow into that engine and getting the biggest bang for your buck, essentially, in the most simple terms. Today it's a bit more complex, of course, with these hybrid engines, but they've struggled a little bit. I don't think it's all about engine, by the way, for Mercedes. I don't think that's the only reason they've struggled, typically around that circuit. I think the nature of the circuit as well hasn't always suited them, whereas it has favoured, particularly sectors 2 and 3, the Red Bull, the high downforce of the Red Bull. It's a kind of trade-off, isn't it? Like many circuits are, with a very fast sector 1 compared to a pretty tight and twisty sector 2 and then a very tight and twisty sector 3. And it's the trade-off between the two. Which one yields the biggest results? And typically, I think, given that there are two sectors relying on greater downforce as opposed to the one sector relying on very little downforce, it's the Red Bull that's typically felt stronger at those circuits. 7 weeks to Christmas and 5 races to go, says Josh Smith. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for reminding us. Get those Christmas presents bought now. Will Ferrari be competitive here? Maybe a podium on pure pace? No reason why not, actually. You know what? Because Ferrari have typically been, or have recently at least, been making big strides. Their engine seems like a decent step forward, and so around here, if that can work in the same sort of way, that might give them a decent step. So there's no reason Ferrari can't be good around here. And they're in a very tight battle with McLaren, of course, incredibly tight right now. There's not a lot between those two teams, given that Ferrari have had a couple of good races recently. McLaren had a couple of good races before that, and it's ebbing and flowing a little bit, which is so nice, isn't it? That's what's so good about this season. All the way down the field, we've had these little mini battles going on that have ebbed and flowed depending on which racetrack we go to. And it's the same at the front. We've had the championship swinging one way and the other, and there's almost nothing in it. As I said last week, Max may have won that last race, but they were on the same piece of tarmac on the very last lap of the Grand Prix with nothing in it. Less than a second at the end of that race. So performance-wise, they are very, very close. They have different strengths and different weaknesses, but their overall performance, because the cars generate their performance in slightly different ways, their overall performance is very, very close on most racetracks. And I think we'll see that as the season comes towards its conclusion. Will you be at Mexico GP? No, not going to any races this year, Robert Chew, I'm afraid, which is sad to say. Last year was the first season that I hadn't been to at least one Grand Prix in over 20 years. And, it was a shame. It was a real shame. I massively missed it. I've always been, in the last few years working for Sky, I've been to at least half the Grand Prix. Last year I didn't go to any, and this year is going to be the same by the look of it, which is a shame, but I'll definitely be back. I can't wait to get back to races again. Just gotta hold out until things get back to some sort of normality again. Right. Loving the yellow VW. We'll have to see this a bit later. So that's a Wheeler Dealers comment. The Wheeler. Just quickly explain, if you've been watching Wheeler Dealers, lots of people are asking me, how come I've got the next week's episode has been recorded on my Skybox already? It's because it slips it out early on a Sunday night or something in the middle of the night, which is some weird contractual thing to allow them to show it on the pay-per-view app, the Discovery Plus app. That's why if you are recording the series, you'll get the episodes a week early, and then it goes out on what we call linear TV, so normal broadcast TV at 9 o'clock on a Monday night. So the yellow VW episode that some of you have already seen will go out next week, and that's the final one in this season, which is kind of sad because I've loved it playing out, loved making it. We're already well into recording season 2 of Wheeler Dealers Dream Car, and then when we finally get through that, we'll be getting rolling straight into another series of Wheeler Dealers. So there's plenty more shows coming your way. There's another 20 shows that'll be coming over the next year or so of Dream Car and Wheeler Dealers. So even when this one ends, it's not the end. Will Checo be allowed to win in Mexico? That's a good one, DChat15. It's a big question, that, and I think the very simple answer is it obviously depends on what Max is doing. If Max is in a position to win that Grand Prix, it would be foolish of Red Bull to hamper a championship fight for the sake of a home hero getting a good result. And I know that Checo would understand that. He wouldn't like it, he wouldn't enjoy it, but he knows the situation they're in. His teammate is up for a world title, which is a huge deal. It's a huge deal for him and the team, and Checo knows what his role is in this scenario. So if Max is out the race, then absolutely, and let's have Checo come through and be fighting at the front. I mean, as I said before, imagine the atmosphere in that final sector if Checo was in a great position in this Grand Prix. We'll have to wait and see, but ultimately the team has to do what's right for the team. The drivers are employees of that team. They both have a job to do. The championship battle this year is between Max and Lewis. Checo's not in it, and therefore he will have to play a team game if that role is required of him. Has Lewis lost the World Championship now? Absolutely not. No, I mean, if there's one thing I know about Lewis, and I do know this about Lewis, he will not give up until it's mathematically impossible, nor will the team. They want this as much as ever. You know, the 8th championship is a big one, but they're all big. Every world title is, as I said many times, it's an indescribably difficult thing to achieve. And it doesn't matter if you've already won 7 before, it's still the biggest deal there is in this sport. And he will still want it. He will want it more than ever. So there's no way that Lewis has thrown this championship away. There's no way that it's over. There is a long way to go, and as we all know, anything can happen in Formula One in a split second. There could be a collision, there could be a puncture that gets thrown up, there could be an engine failure, there could be literally anything. A rain could come down and a poor strategy decision could literally flip a race on its head, like it's done already this season. So there's no way it's over, and we'll have to just wait and see. That's also what's so good about it, isn't it? We just don't know which way it could go. When will your series of Wheeler Dealers appear on Quest or Dave? I've got no idea, I'm afraid. Quest is normally like a couple of years after it's played out. Because don't forget, it's going out in the UK right now, coming towards its end, but it's also got to do the whole lap of the world. It's just started going out in the US. It'll go out in a whole host of other countries. So it goes out everywhere. So it'll actually be a good 6 or 8 months before it's done the entire lap of the planet with its first season. And some point after that, it might then get passed down to Dave in the UK, not Dave, Quest in the UK. What do you think about the 2022 car being half a second slow? says Milan Palmer. So there's lots of rumours about how fast or slow the 22 car is. It was designed to be slower. The idea was it was going to be slower because it's heavier, it has a different drag coefficient, it is designed with a different aerodynamic package to help close racing, not necessarily to maximise outright lap time. So it was always going to be slower. And yet, as the teams often do, through their development, their virtual development so far, they've already managed to claw back a huge amount of the lost time from the design in the regulations. And we don't know how slow it or how much different it's going to be to today's cars, but I can already see, I answered somebody in the sort of pre-show chat when someone's asking a similar question. I don't think they'll be that much slower than the current cars by the time we hit the racetrack in the new year, next year. And that's an incredible achievement. It's what Formula One teams do very well, of course, but it's an astounding achievement. And of course, if you do take that and then take a rate of development which will be astoundingly fast, given that they are new cars and therefore the host of possibilities in front of everybody, the learning and the development and understanding from running those cars, which is going to accelerate so quickly just when they start hitting the racetrack, you can see that start point getting to a point that's probably a second quicker than that by the end of the season, and that's huge. So we may well end up with cars that are faster than 2021 by the end of 2022. We'll have to wait and see. Who's your favourite for the title this year? Well, someone had to ask it, didn't they? There's the big question. I touched on this last time, and I can't call it in terms of, I don't think there's a favourite. I don't think one's done a particularly better job. I think we're witnessing two of the sport's all-time great drivers and all-time great teams operating at their very best and maximising, in the most part, what they've been able to achieve at most rounds. And there's been nothing between them. If you want to really zero in and focus on the races we've got left, you could start to sort of come up with draw conclusions to who they might favour. And if you really want to do that, you know, this one you might say falls on the side of Red Bull. You might look at the Brazilian Grand Prix and say, well, it could on paper fall the same way, but I'm not sure. There's nothing in it. Lewis loves driving around Brazil. He's had some major success there in the past. He's won championships there famously in the past. He does love that place. He has a real affinity with Brazil as well, due to his sort of connection, a spiritual connection he has to Ayrton. I can't call that one. I think that was mighty close. And then the last three, two of them are brand new circuits to Formula One, and the other one is Abu Dhabi, which, you know, again, Lewis and the team have won championships there. They've had success there. So it's very difficult to call. The one thing I might say about the last three races being in the Middle East is that they're typically hot races, and the higher temperatures have often tended to suit Red Bull when it comes to things like track temperature and managing tyres, time performance throughout those extreme temperatures. So if we get into a zone of extreme heat, perhaps again you might look at Red Bull maybe having a minor advantage, but it's nothing, it's minor, and we are focusing down to a macro level to draw those kind of conclusions, and I certainly wouldn't want to put too much money on anything right now because it's so close, and again, as I say, that's what I love about this year. Right, let's see. Is Christian Horner a better team manager than Toto Wolff, Jonathan Moore? Well, that is, I mean, first of all, it's an impossible question to answer because you're managing two very different organisations. Both have had amazing success and both are in a championship fight this year with nothing much between them. So how are you measuring who's better? Are you measuring it just on results? Because if you do that, well, the stats would say that Toto and his team are better, but that's not just down to Toto. So it's an impossible thing to really, there's no metric that you know defines how good a team manager is. The only way you could really judge that is have somebody who's worked for both of them or worked with both of them. They would have a better picture of how each of them stack up in different disciplines. And as with anything, as with drivers and with teams in general, they'll have strengths and they'll have weaknesses, and you know they will both add and take away different things from the team. So difficult to say. They're both doing an amazing job. They've both led very successful organisations, built them up into fantastic groups of people that are operating at the very, very high end of performance, and that I think has to be respected from both of them. Right. Hi from Melbourne. Just discovered Wheeler Dealers because of you. I love it, says Monkey Face Senior. Thank you very much, Monkey Face Senior. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the show. Formula One could drop its Q3 tyre rule 8 years after it was introduced because it hands an advantage to the quickest cars, says Nutcracker. And that, I believe, is a headline that you've copied and pasted because I read that exact same thing earlier this afternoon. So this is something that Ross Brawn has identified, or certainly has recognised, that a lot of teams, drivers, fans have often been saying, actually been saying for quite some time, we don't need this rule that says you must start the race on the tyre that you qualify in Q2 on if you get into the top 10. Because essentially the very fast cars, they got such a pace advantage, they can sail through into Q3 without even using the medium tyre. And that means that some other teams who are just desperate to get into Q3 have to use up the softest tyre to be able to just scrape through. And that doesn't seem particularly fair. And so, is there any major advantage to keeping that rule of starting the race on the Q2 tyre? Perhaps not. And so they are looking for next year at the idea of potentially scrapping it. My feeling is they probably will scrap it because a number of drivers and teams have come out quite publicly now saying it's not a great idea. And if Ross Brawn's starting to suggest that he might agree with that, the next logical step is that it would probably end up going, but we'll have to wait and see. Better starting position in Mexico, P1 or P2? Well, it's a difficult one, isn't it? You can only really judge that with hindsight, because if you get an amazing start, well, being in P1 is great. If you get a dodgy start from P1, well, the guy in P2 has a very long run to slipstream you down towards turn 1. And so there is this argument that says, particularly given how long the run is, there's an advantage or a potential, or certainly no disadvantage to starting the race in P2. I think the idea, if you get into P1, is you have to get a blistering launch and then somehow manage to break that toe of the car behind, but it can be very, very difficult. And as I said before, these cars are so closely matched, that it can be very difficult. These cars, though, as I said at the beginning, have different strengths and weaknesses. Now, the Red Bull doesn't have anywhere near the straight line speed of a Mercedes. And that section of the racetrack, of course, is all about top speed. And so off the start, you can imagine a scenario where Max, who might have a faster car around the lap, delivers a P1 time, puts himself on pole. Lewis, maybe not quite as quick, but tucks in behind in second or third, but with a top speed advantage. If they both get a decent start, you could easily find Lewis finding his way into the lead of the race by the time they get through turn 1. So that's another real difficult scenario to predict. It depends on the car you're in, I would say. If you're a Mercedes, if you're a Mercedes in P1 and a Red Bull in P2, perhaps you can tag on to that very fast Mercedes and drag yourself down the racetrack with a slower Red Bull car. But if it was the other way round, maybe you don't stand too much of a chance against a very, very fast Mercedes down that first straight. We'll have to wait and see. Can Mercedes use engine parts from Bottas's engine for Lewis's engine? No. No. So the engines are linked to the driver. And many people have said, look, Valtteri's taken like 6 PUs now, power units now, into his pool, whereas Lewis only has 4. Can Lewis take one of Valtteri's and put it into his pool? Could they swap cars? You can't do that because the engine is logged to the driver. And so even if they were to swap cars, the engine allocation would also swap with the driver. So if they swap chassis, they'd have to swap the engine out of that chassis so that it sticks with the same driver. That's the way the rules work, so you can't do that, I'm afraid. What was your view on Stars getting trackside and being rude to Martin Brundle? So that was last time out in the States. Well, first of all, can I just say I thought Martin handled it very, very well. Martin has a highlights reel of that kind of stuff, of people dissing him, telling him he's not allowed to speak to them, giving them ridiculous comments because they're so blind drunk on the grid. He's got a brilliant history of his grid walks, and I thought he handled it pretty well. It is rude, isn't it? I mean, it is. I have to say, it was it was more the sort of the hangers-on that were actually the rude ones, wasn't it? So that's often the case. People like that hanging around superstars, desperately trying to justify their own position there, and probably getting a bit overexcited. So yeah, a bit rude, but Martin did very well, as he always does. Zach Brown's very good on rewarding his drivers. Your thoughts? The NASCAR ride, etc. Yeah, it was cool. I mean, it is cool, isn't it? He's in a position to be able to offer some nice things like that. I don't think it has a huge bearing. It's not what motivates these drivers, of course, but it's a nice little reward. I've got to say, I think he's also pretty good at typically rewarding the rest of the team as well, in terms of recognising their achievements, recognising their efforts. And I think that massively stems from Andreas Seidel, who's a massive supporter of building the right culture in the organisation, which is something he's done over the last few years. And Zach has supported Andreas all the way through that process, almost given Andreas complete free rein to build the culture into whatever he wanted it to be and use whatever tools necessary to build that culture. And he now has that. He has a great culture now, still developing, but night and day different to the culture that existed during the Alonso period or the Honda period, where things were incredibly difficult and pretty dark, if I'm honest, for a lot of people in that organisation. And things have turned around. And I think I mentioned once before, they haven't turned around because they've had a little bit of success. The success has come because they've turned things around in the organisation. It's genuinely that way round, and that's what these little moments of success spark an even greater surge in the buoyancy inside the culture, the positivity inside the organisation, and that breeds even greater results. And that's the way these cycles begin to build. That's why you get the little path towards the greater success. It's not a flash in the pan, it's building something all the way through. You've got to have the right people and the right structures in place, which is what they've been doing over the last few years. And these little nuggets of success are a testament to that, and also part of the journey towards the even bigger success that I'm sure will come at some point. This is the kind of stuff that I'm massively interested in. It's the kind of stuff that I go around the world speaking to organisations about, building cultures and building teams in organisations that can generate success and also can deal with failure, can deal with the tough times. That's just as important. McLaren now have that in abundance, where they're able to handle the tougher times, they're able to deal with those, accept them for what they are, learn from them, and put them towards stepping on towards having a more successful outcome next time. And it's been an amazing thing to watch and witness unfold. And speaking to the people in it still, as I do regularly, it's been a fascinating journey to follow. I've followed it very closely. I've been a part of it to some extent in small ways, and I've really enjoyed it. And I'm really enjoying the success they're now starting to have. What do you think, Josh Smith, what do you think about the leader of the championship crashing into the other driver if needed to win the championship? Now that is a really interesting question, because we've got, and I don't want to cast aspersions into either of the two title protagonists this time around. They are both drivers we know are desperate to win this championship, and it could genuinely come down to the final race, and they could end up on the same patch of tarmac going through the very final corners of the last round, and the finishing position could literally determine who takes the title. Now, deliberately crashing, of course, no one can ever condone that. It's, first of all, stupid. It's secondly dangerous. It's against the rules. It should be heavily punished. I don't believe any of the drivers on the grid would set out to deliberately crash into anyone else. I genuinely don't believe anyone would do that. However, that's one thing. The other thing is being in the heat of the moment and having a red mist, or being overcome by the emotion of an incredibly stressful situation, a high intensity situation, a situation that can happen in a split second. And look, we've seen these two drivers come together already multiple times throughout this season. They're not willing to give up. And if it came to the final race of the season, they're going to be even less willing to give up a patch of tarmac for, given that their main rival might take the position as a result of giving up or not having their elbows out. And so the likelihood of the guys coming together in that final race is even higher if they find themselves running wheel to wheel and closer than ever before. So I don't think it's about drivers deliberately crashing into each other, but a moment of madness or a moment of high intensity when it comes to crunch, like we've already had. Well, I can absolutely see that happening, but I don't see it happening as a deliberate action. I really can't see that any driver on the grid in today's field would do that, genuinely. Right. Do you really think Max is desperate to win the title? He seems very stoic about it. He just wants to race. Oh, come on, are you serious? Oh, yes, Max really wants to win the title. I mean, this is the world title in Formula One. I mean, it is the holy grail. It's the thing that if you are growing up dreaming of being a racing driver, the end goal of that, the ultimate achievement, is to become Formula One world champion. And they are this close to it. Max being this close for the very first time, of course he's desperate to win this title. He may never, quite frankly, get another opportunity being this good, being this close. We don't know what's going to happen with the 2022 cars and beyond. It's a completely new set of rules. They have honed the Red Bull philosophy down to this year, 2021, the final year of these regulations. Honda have fine-tuned and honed their power unit, their engine, to its greatest capabilities in 2021 so far. Everything has come good. They finally got on level pegging with their arch nemesis. He may never get another opportunity to be this close to the thing that he's dreamt of his whole life. He's desperate for this title, believe me. Smash the like button. Marc's mum might be watching. Thank you very much, Sandy Barnes. Do what he says. Smash the like button. Thank you very much. Enjoying these sessions. Thank you, Anthony De Winter. Appreciate it. So do I. I enjoy them too. Who's under more pressure, says Alfie Willis. Lewis, maybe his last chance to get the 8th title, or Max to get his first. So, really good point. They're both under massive pressure. And as I just said, either of them or neither of them may get this opportunity again. Who knows? Who knows what will happen? I firmly believe, really, if I'm honest about it, that in 2022 and beyond, it will be Red Bull and Mercedes together with others that will be up in the top section of the grid, probably still fighting for race wins, maybe even fighting for the title. But it's definitely not guaranteed. This year they have an opportunity. They have a title, a car capable of a title, a driver capable of a title on both sides of this fight. And I just think it's one of the greatest seasons that we will witness or have witnessed for many, many years because of all of that. There's nothing between them. They're still going race by race and the championship's ebbing and flowing, and we could well go down to the wire. And I really hope it does. And even if it doesn't, I still think this will be one of the greatest seasons because of the way that it's played out. But look, these two guys are under massive pressure. Look, Lewis will desperately want this title, but if he were to never get it, he's still a 7-time world champion. If Max were to never get any world title, well, he will never be a Formula One world champion, which is what he'll have dreamed of forever. So there are differences in the way they will both be approaching this, but that doesn't mean to say that Lewis wants this any less than Max. I don't believe that to be true. I think they both are desperate for it, and we'll see how that desperation shakes out over the coming races. Let's hope in the finest possible way. How pivotal was that Silverstone incident now? Well, very pivotal, but any incident, any moment, and you can't reflect, often people say a race was won on the, that let's take 2008, an amazing championship, the one for me, which was obviously the greatest because we won it. And if you think about the way that championship was concluded, people always say to me, amazing how you guys won the championship in the last corner of the last lap of the last race at Brazil. We didn't win it there. We didn't win the championship there. We won that championship through consistency of results over the course of the whole season, through minimising the number of mistakes and errors and failures we had over the course of that season. And yes, that final race in Brazil was just another one of those where we managed to maximise what was available to us in those circumstances. And so it's not about any particular given incident because yes, Silverstone was very costly, but there have been others, and I'm sure there will be others that could also prove costly. If you lose the championship by 1 point on either side, you can pinpoint all manner of different things, can't you, that might have made the difference. So it's one of those things, you've just got to consistently keep going and getting your best results all the way through the season. And if you do that, you've got a very good chance of winning the title. Who's your money on? I mean, stop asking me that. I'm not putting money on either of these two drivers because it's literally a gamble. There's not really any science that can prove one has a much better opportunity than the other. I've talked about why you could probably argue to some extent that Max might have a favourable set of conditions, but there's probably a number of arguments to swing it the other way too. And even despite all of that, we've seen racetracks that we think might suit one car and have actually favoured another. So I couldn't possibly call it, and I'm not putting any money on it. Hold on, right. I think Lewis will be better than Max with just experience. I think he'll have an 8-time World Championship and then retire, says Rory Jones. So that is the other thing that Lewis has that Max just simply cannot have at this stage. And Max is no rookie anymore, let's be honest, but he doesn't have the many years of experience that Lewis has. He doesn't have the many years of chasing and winning and losing world titles that Lewis has. And all of those things are valuable, and particularly valuable when it comes down to a long fight in a championship where every detail matters. And it could well be that it's experience that could end up being the difference. We talk about desperation in the final rounds if it's that close. Well, how will Max deal with that, cope with that desperation? How will it play out in his mind? How will he react in a moment if he sees Lewis coming up behind him or making a lunge? Will he be so desperate that he'll make a move to get his elbows out that could cost him, the integrity of his car? Could it cost him the race? Whereas maybe Lewis might have an experienced head and think of the bigger picture. Sit back early in the race, not make that desperate move, and perhaps wait, later in the Grand Prix for an opportunity. I don't know, but experience does give you that kind of insight and benefit. And there is nothing Max can do to equal the experience that Lewis has right now. So that is a strength that Lewis can play on. Max has plenty of his own strengths as well, and he'll play on those too. But that's like the cars having different strengths and weaknesses, the drivers are the same. And it's about maximising your strengths, minimising your areas of weakness, and let's see how it shakes out at the final race of the year. Goodness, they're flying through here. What about, this is a good one, Oliver Court. What about the experience of the strategists and engineers and the pit mechanics? Are any of them in their first championship fight? That's a really great point. And absolutely, this is not only about the drivers. Of course it isn't. It is about the entire team. Already this year, we've seen on both sides of the coin, we've seen the teams at Red Bull and Mercedes both win and lose Grand Prix through strategic decisions, through pit stops, through the car reliability when it comes to Mercedes engines. We've seen a number of things that other elements of the team can impact and have an effect on the outcome of races. And that's always been the case. It always will be the case. Mercedes, you might look at and say, well, in the most part, they're a team of multiple championship winning people all the way through the organisation. They have strength in depth when it comes to championship winning experience. There are massive elements of that Red Bull organisation who have also won multiple championships, albeit a few years ago. So they are the two most successful teams in recent times in our sport. They are the two biggest teams in terms of resource and alongside with Ferrari, who also have massive resource. But those two are the big powerhouses of recent times. They have probably arguably the two best drivers on the grid right now, going wheel to wheel. Definitely got the two best cars. Everything's the best. The pit crews on both sides are massively experienced. You could probably look at Red Bull and say, well, they've been consistently the fastest over recent times, but they've also made a couple of errors recently. Mercedes equally have had hiccups and brilliant moments too. So I honestly don't think we can call anything between those two, but it's a really interesting point. Because even if, and I can tell you from my own experience, when you are in a championship fight and you go down to the last race of a season, for example, and that might be, and I've done this a number of times now, but on the last day of a season, when your driver, your car has the possibility to win a world title. People talk about the pressure on the driver. I can tell you from experience, the pressure on the people behind the scenes is enormous. You know, putting that car together, bursting out the garage for a pit stop in the middle of that race where you know your role, your tiny little role, could massively swing the entire world championship one way or the other. With millions of people watching, the pressure is, you know, staggering. And I can testify to how that can cripple people because I've seen it. And, you know, that is why, you know, we, in the latter years of my time at McLaren, most of the big teams today put a huge amount of effort into strengthening not only the teams from a practice point of view, but also from a physical point of view, and also especially from a mental toughness point of view. Preparing them for these big high pressure moments. That's as crucial as anything else, so that when it comes, when the moment arrives, your team is as well prepared in all areas as they can be. And you can guarantee that both of those teams will be doing that all the way through. They've been doing it for years. They'll continue to do it. But you still never know when it comes to the moment. A driver can make a mistake under pressure, as can a pit crew mechanic, as can an engineer, a strategist, an engineer on the radio. There are all manner of people, because we are all humans, who can make mistakes. And those mistakes can have a huge impact. Imagine being the person who makes a mistake and that mistake ends up meaning that driver, your driver, no longer wins the World Championship that, as I've already said, they've dreamt of winning for their entire life. The burden that puts on that person is enormous. And the team, the organisation, has to be ready for when that happens. And I, again, can testify how I've seen this break people, literally break people and go beyond breaking point when a moment like that happens and that person feels like they just cannot bear that pressure. And they feel like they've let not only their teammates down, the driver down, the millions of fans around the world down as well, all down to one guy who's just a normal guy like me. I can tell you that is massive. That's a massive, massive deal that actually isn't given anywhere near enough importance in the sort of typical broadcast media, because they're not the stars of the show, they're the backroom staff. But in Formula One, you know, the backroom staff come out onto the field of play, don't they, in the middle of the event. That doesn't happen in many other sports, and so it's a big deal, it's a big pressure, and you're absolutely right, whoever it was, Oliver Court, it's a really good point. Any of those people in any of those positions, some of them it will be their first championship fight. Some of them won't have the experience that many of the other people in those teams have, and for those people, well, let's hope that they are well prepared, let's hope they can deal with the pressure, and let's hope they've got people around them that can help them deal with a failure should it happen. Rory Jones says, is there good mental health support in F1? Historically, not at all. In fact, it's been really bad. Historically, Formula One has been very, very slow to address anything to do with, you know, what people tend to call soft skills, which is a terrible name for them, but the mental health side of things, the emotional support that is needed. You know, we're seeing it still today where people are talking about 23 races and going up to 25 races and how that has an impact on the people involved. And then we have people like Franz Tost coming out and saying, look, if you can't handle it, get out. You know, that's a sort of prehistoric attitude really today, because the people are the lifeblood of this sport. It's the people that Franz Tost is relying on to deliver the elite performance that he expects from his team. And look, there'll be moments when his own team will be relying on these people and need these people. And I dread to think what might happen to somebody in that organisation with him as a leader if they have some kind of emotional breakdown or some kind of failure that costs them in terms of mental health or mental stability. It doesn't feel like a great place to be if that's the leadership attitude from the very top. So typically F1's been poor. In more recent times, we've begun to address it, obviously like the rest of the world has. I still don't think Formula One is as good as many industries. And as I said, I go around the world now talking to some of the world's biggest organisations about how they can build successful teams and create cultures inside those teams that will deliver success. The mental and emotional support for the people involved is a huge part of delivering high performance. We've typically, you know, focused only on being as strong as we can. You know, working out, getting physically fit and training in the role that you're doing. But we've typically not focused almost anything on mentally preparing and emotionally preparing those people for those roles and the pressure that comes with it. It's beginning to change, could definitely do a lot more. Right. Mark, do you think that F1 can bring its circus around the world, seeing the environmental talks? So Formula One has this real dilemma, doesn't it? Because they've got this, and we have touched on this before, so apologies if I'm going over old ground, but we've got this commitment to go net zero, which is they want the events, the Formula One events, to be net zero by 2030. Now, what that means on behind the scenes really is that as an event, they don't want it to cost any carbon emissions when you take the whole picture as a whole. Now that means, of course, they're going to be creating carbon emissions when everyone flies around the world to go to the event. But Formula One needs to, or wants to, offset those carbon emissions with other good stuff that they're doing, or with donations, or with planting trees, or whatever it is they decide to do through recycling and other efforts too. It's a great step, but Formula One is never going to be environmentally friendly because we will have to be flying around the world. And until someone comes up with a long distance emission-free aeroplane, which I can't see happening in the near future, it's going to be a pretty inefficient way of doing the sport. There are more efficient ways to do it, of course. We can organise the schedule in a much more efficient manner to minimise the cost of travel and the amount of travel, and that is something they're looking at. I don't see that it's going to stop Formula One from happening, certainly not in the short or medium term, but in the long term, who knows? I can definitely see a time where being environmentally unfriendly will be as socially unacceptable as kind of smoking has become in recent times, because there'll be an even greater swell of passion and popularity for the movements that are against it. Can Formula One ever withstand that? Probably not, but by that point, hopefully we've moved on with technologies and logistics to enable us to be a much more environmentally friendly operation. So the way things are right now, we certainly couldn't sustain that for very much longer, but we don't have to, because things are definitely changing. Whether they can change fast enough, I don't know. Right, what we got here? 10 minutes or so left. Right. Toto will have to plant a tree for every table he smashes. We have Formula E for the environment. We need F1. Well, let's be clear. Formula E is not a completely environmentally friendly operation. Formula E, one of Formula E's biggest strengths is that it's developing the technology that will help our transport systems become more environmentally friendly. But let's be fair, we're still flying around the world to Formula E races. So there's lots of really great stuff. I'm a fan of Formula E and the initiative and the things that are going around alongside it, the way they're operating. They are operating in a much more efficient manner than Formula One does. Formula One can learn an awful lot, and is learning an awful lot, let's be fair, from the way Formula E operates in terms of scheduling and transport and those kind of things. But we still have to travel around the world. It's a global sport, and the only real sensible way to do that in the time frames we have is by aeroplane right now. And there's a lot of people, a lot of flights, a lot of freight, and until we get a better way of doing that, that's the only real proper solution we have. Right, definitely will buy a yellow car. Great job, you've absolutely glued with Mike. Thank you, another Wheeler Dealers comment. Yeah, the yellow car episode will be on TVs next Monday, as I said, the final one. It's a good one, it's quite a funny one. I hope you'll enjoy that, but thank you very much. Do you think Lewis has had the luckiest season out of all the drivers when it counted? E.g. red flag when he was a lap down at Imola, Max having a blowout at Baku, etc. I mean, look, I really... Both drivers have had their moments of luck and their moments of bad luck. You get red flags at the wrong or the right time. You get, drivers crashing into you by accident. They collided at Silverstone and, Lewis managed to keep going. Max didn't. There's going to be moments like that all the way through every season. I don't think, unless there's a massive set of coincidences that mean one driver gets all the luck, then it's very difficult to point at a lucky moment and say, well, that was the moment. As I said before, it's about consistency, and both drivers are delivering consistently incredibly well throughout the season. So if it comes down to luck, I'd be very disappointed, but I really don't think it will. I think it's going to come down to whoever can deliver the best job most of the time throughout this season, and it's fine margins. F1 should do a better job of highlighting just how efficient the current engines actually are. Yeah, that's a good point, says DC Ellis. It's a good point. It's a point that's been raised a number of times, and actually still I don't think we're doing a very good job. We raised this point, or this point was raised 3, 4, 5 years ago now, when we really started to, develop them to the massively efficient power units they are today. And I think from a manufacturer perspective, I mean, the teams should be shouting about it. Formula One should be shouting about it. The manufacturers of these engines, I think, could still do an even better job. Yes, we see Mercedes talking about it. We see Honda talking about it every now and again, but I don't see a sustained campaign focused on Formula One talking about engine efficiency. And part of that, of course, is because the public don't want to hear about combustion engines right now, in the most part. They want to hear about, electric technologies. They want to hear about hydrogen technologies or environmentally friendly technologies. Now, there's an environmentally friendly element to the fact that a combustion engine is more efficient, but it's more efficient than the really unenvironmentally friendly version that we had before. It's not green, is it? It's not clean. So it's a difficult marketing angle for Formula One, and that's what's a massive dilemma for me, which is why, for me, I think it's really strange the level that Formula One have pitched themselves. And what we're asking of engine manufacturers is to commit hundreds of millions of dollars to a sport where they can't really shout too loudly about the product that they're developing within this sport. So you're kind of reliant on the success. Mercedes have obviously had incredible success. For them, the return on their investment is unquestionable. They've been the most successful team, consistently for years now. That does massive win for their brand, and that's why they spend the money. But if you're a Honda, if you're a Renault, why are you committing this amount of money? Because you're not getting that sustained winning. You're not going to dominate the sport for years at the moment, and yet you've been committing many millions and not really seeing, in my mind at least, enough marketing benefit. So I always find it a strange one. There are a number of reasons. There are financial reasons in terms of accounting, tax reasons and benefits, and all sorts of reasons why people commit to marketing within Formula One or investing in Formula One. But it seems like there's a massive opportunity. It's one of the world's biggest stages. You really want to be able to shout about the product you developed and how it might influence the road cars that you want to sell to people on a Monday morning. Is there any chance that Red Bull sacrificed the team championship to achieve the drivers' championship with Max? So that's quite a good question, and it is a scenario that could happen. For that to happen, of course, it's a pretty specific set of circumstances that has to come up, because in theory, they want to maximise the result with both of their cars as long as it's Max in front. And in doing so, you in theory also maximise your team's championship result in the same way, don't you? So having both cars get the best result possible is not only hopefully going to help Max as long as he's first, and they have the power to switch those, of course, but it also helps your team's championship. There could be a scenario where they want to sacrifice Checo in a particular race, i.e. put him on a strategy that they know will not yield the best result, but potentially could hamper Mercedes. So, for example, leaving him out very, very long on strategy, which may not be the quickest way from lights to flag for Checo, but might mean that there's not a window that opens up for Lewis to make a pit stop and drop back into, therefore forcing Lewis's hand on strategy. So that scenario could definitely happen, and I don't think there's any question that Red Bull would do that if they had to, to try and win this title. Yes, they want the team's championship, but I think the drivers' championship is the one that holds most credibility. The drivers' championship is the one that, from their perspective, they want to deliver for Max, because that's probably the only way they're going to be able to hang on to Max beyond the end of this current contract term that he's on. It's to deliver world championship. So they know that's important. And I think that is almost certainly what will happen if they come to it. We've seen flashes of it already, but I also think that they have a car, and Checo, the trouble with Checo is, if he's on form, if he's on song, he can be as quick as Max. He can be right up the front. They can be fighting with two cars in the front row. If he's not on one of his really top form days, then he's a pawn to be played with and sacrificed because maybe he's not in the hunt for the podium position. So we'll have to see how it goes, but I don't think they'd think twice about using him in that way if they had to and it meant winning the championship. Right. You said you wouldn't bet, but who do you want to win? You're trying your hardest. I don't care. I genuinely don't care. And honestly, I do mean that. I'm not just sitting on the fence here. I don't mind who wins this title. And I'm just being genuinely honest. I'm not, when I'm doing stuff on TV, you've got to be, in some ways impartial. I'm not doing that. I'm saying that because despite whatever the outcome is of this season, I have massively enjoyed it so far. I know I'm going to enjoy it right through to the end. And so I don't want to attach myself to one side or the other, because if the one you don't want to win wins, well, then there might be a tinge of disappointment in that. There might be some feeling of, being let down from not meeting your expectations. And I don't want that. My expectation and my hope is that we have a fantastic title that goes all the way with wheel-to-wheel action, and the best guy wins over the course of the season. And so that's just genuinely my honest feeling on this. So I don't mind who wins. I just want it to be a fantastic championship. Who does your wife want to win? I don't think she cares either. I really don't think she cares. She'll be happy when it's over, because I can start coming back to the family on a Sunday rather than just taking over the telly. Right. Red Bull will lose money. Here's a good point, just before we finish. Red Bull would lose money if they sacrificed the World Constructors' Championship. That's true. If you don't win the World Championship for the Constructors, there's a financial hit because of the prize money you would win if you win it, but that will not be their driving factor, because if they win the title with Max, the marketing and the marketing power that would come off the back of that would far exceed, in my opinion, particularly given that it's Max and how popular he is. That would exceed any prize money that I think would come. And look, they're not going to throw away all their prize money. They would lose some, but I think the gain would be enormous and well worth it, both in the short term, also in the much, much longer term, in terms of potentially keeping Max, potentially getting more success in the future because they've kept Max. And I just don't think that would be a consideration, genuinely. Right, we are pretty much there, guys. Who's your dog want to win? Keep trying. Right, we are there. As I said, I've been whining on for an hour. I'm now going to go and drink this wine. Have a great week, folks. I really appreciate everybody joining. If you could just smash that like button before you go, just hit the like button on your way out. I'd really appreciate that. And also, do us a favour. Just let people know that we're doing this on a Monday night, would you? I know we're not always on a Grand Prix weekend. There's not been any race this weekend, but look, we still have plenty to talk about. Let your friends know that this happens. Drop them a link. I'd really appreciate it. By all means, tag me in. I'll give you a little response and say thank you. But anything you can do to share and spread the word, I'd really appreciate it. So thanks very much. Have a wonderful week. Enjoy the Mexican Grand Prix. And I'll see you this time next Monday. Ta-da.